think the current administration has done a great job open to dialogue and to utilizing the best practices and making known what our concerns are globally, as far as, climate change and resiliency and so forth. The luxury that the United States has is that once there is a major disaster or a pandemic, is that they become wealthy after that, right? So there's a tremendous amount of resources poured into the community to be able to respond to these crises. So I think for us is that it's important. We've never had an issue with brain trusts when it comes to Bahamians. What happens in some cases is that because of the lack of resources, execution of recovery doesn't always happen as it should. So we look at Hurricane Dorian, we look at the current we're getting out of this pandemic. The ability to be able to leverage the resources of our partner countries is super critical. But also, I think having the government infrastructure, because again, government leads these charters when it comes to recovery. And lack of resources shouldn't limit the infrastructure being in place for us to be able to have plans that we can communicate to the populace about how do we respond to storms, how do we respond to pandemics. So I spend most of my time working with large government agencies on executing how they spend their tremendous amount of resources. I think so. Those plans and things exist. So it's key for us to be able to look at the Bahamas and our position within the globe and be able to pre-position ourselves for recovery, which is extremely important. And I think the execution typically was going to benefit the people that need it the most, right? People that need housing, people that need clean water, people that homes were on the brink of issues before, and then a tropical storm comes through or a major flood comes in, and they don't have the resources to be able to repair that. So I think if we look at it from that standpoint and we start to implement the government infrastructure and build the capacity to be able to respond to crises is going to be key. And it also helps when it comes for our economic resiliency and stability, is that if we have plans in place and we have the right people making the decisions on how do we recover quickly from this crisis, it's going to benefit us all. Again, so I highly respect, I think my colleagues have excellent ideas on how we develop the training aspects and get the community involved. But I think it's going to be super important to continue the dialogues, leverage the resources that we have from our global partners to be able to execute plans for recovery. So that's it. That helps us build our resiliency, to help us maintain our economy. So there's resources out there like my firm has, other firms have, that be able to assist countries like that. But we also have very educated Bahamians that have been working in from the federal, state, and local level in the United States and globally to be able to tap into that resource to assist us. So to me, I can't drive enough that being able to have the capacity, the infrastructure, the plans in place for recovery is going to be able to help us. And we've done a great job. If we look at our history, when we come to responding to storms, without the resources of a super wealth country like the United States, we get back to business pretty quick. So I think we just need to utilize those things we've done in the past, implement them, and continue to be able to build the knowledge of our community.
I'm as I listen to you all, I'm wondering the extent to which you and people like yourselves, the government has sought you in giving some advice or to participate in policy development in our country. Quite often we look to the outside for consultants for various things in the Bahamas. Dr. Carey, to what extent are you consulted, or any of you, and the extent to which you wish to participate in policy development in our country? Speak to it, please. Just jump in.
The last part first. I would relish being part of that kind of brain trust or a group. And I feel like I'm left out. Quite honestly, I wish that I were consulted more for this kind of conversation. I can tell you, for years I tried to bring cancer expertise, and I said I'd give information for free, even when I had an active lab, and I never got one inroad into even in the Bahamas Cancer Society. I've had some connections with University of Bahamas, but severely underutilized. When I come through, I've actually proposed. I said I'm coming through. I'd be happy to give a seminar or give a talk or whatever else, and talk to young people. And the kinds of exchanges what my colleagues have been saying before, having a couple students come over, a couple faculty coming over, whatever else. I have faculty lined up. Kendra can tell you, they tell us, give us room and board and we'll come and teach immunology all day long.
Okay.
But we're not utilized. We're underutilized, and it would be really wonderful to be part of a strategic plan of sorts. It's a Commonwealth wide, large, big idea, strategic plan for the Bahamas that incorporates current and future looking technologies. That it would be a joy to be part of that. So I know that His Excellency Joshua Sears was working on building a database, a repository of Bahamian professionals in the Washington, D.C. areas. That was one of his dreams, and he was working on that with people who lived in his area. And we would get together at his house or at the embassy and share ideas. And I would like to see more of that, more of the Bahamian diaspora here in the area, in New York and Washington, D.C., and even an invite down to Tennessee would be wonderful. But also doing more of that in the Bahamas. Could the Bahamas government sponsor a kind of a retreat of sorts where Bahamian professionals with a bunch of expertise come and share a bunch of ideas? I just got back from a national meeting out at University of Michigan for persons kind of in my space and associated with my space. And we present what we're presenting, what we're doing well. They presented what they're doing and doing well. The amount of learning that happens over a short amount of time is incredible. I like to see more of that in the Bahamas. So we're here at your beck and call once you need us, Your Excellency.
Well, this is what we're doing right now. And so
Your Excellency, if I could take it a step further, and I know you know this quote, but Prime Minister Motley at the OAS this past week said that we cannot be a part of the solution by merely talking. Mm-hmm. We have to be allowed to put our shoulders in and literally put at the plow and make the work happen. And so I believe the pandemic has given us the perfect storm, given us the opportunity for us to connect, to be a part of committees, to be a part of panel discussions, absolutely, but really to be a part of working groups, to be a part of a brain trust. I think it's important for us to go ahead and recognize that the Bahamas has amazing brain trust globally. But the fact of the matter remains, we are not being included to come back home. Those of you who live in the DMV area, who are living close to the ambassador or close to a consulate, that's wonderful. Those of us who live someplace else in the US or someplace else in Canada or anywhere globally where there is no consulate presence, where there is no ambassador's office, unfortunately, we have to connect on our own, and we have to have some kind of mechanism so that we can share ideas, share tools, share approaches, share strategies. I mean, again, my background is in strategy. And in my study, what I was able to determine was the fact that Bahamians who live globally want to be a part of what's next for the Bahamas. I studied something that we are all living and we all walking in, the Bahamian brain drain, which is so unique to the Caribbean brain drain, because as we know, Your Excellency, the world likes to put us all into one big bucket. They want to call us the Americas. They want to call us the Caribbean region. But Bahamians, I always tell my colleagues, it's always better in the Bahamas.
Yep. Yeah, well, you know, I'm working with Minister Consular here, Sonia Rose, and we have reached out to you all, and we are doing that on an ongoing basis, so that you would better assist our government in some policy development challenges that they have. Kendra Sears, let's hear from you.
So I was going to say, and I glossed over it in my introduction because there's so many of us, but and Greg said, so Greg is a mentor for me. I had the opportunity to work with him for 1.5 years in his lab, studying B-cell lymphomas, signaling pathways in B-cell lymphomas. And even though it wasn't my interest, what it taught me was how it exposed me to how to do good science and be in an environment where that science was funded and appreciated, right? And gosh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But I also had the privilege of being able to do that and not have to worry about where I was going to live or anything like that. And I think, and Greg can sort of speak to that in the programs that we have here for undergraduate students, post-bac students, masters, that providing that opportunity to people who might not come into contact with other scientists, right? So for me, like I went to university, it did not occur to me that I could get a PhD in microbiology, right? That's something I figured out along the way. But exposing students to those opportunities early, giving them the space to have those experiences, talk to scientists who look like them, who come from the places where they are from, that in and of itself is life-changing for people. And I think it's a really low bar, I think, one, to, invite us to give lectures. And it could be by Zoom, right? People would love it if it was in person, but tap into this expertise and this knowledge and the work that we are doing by, facilitating that for University of the Bahamas. So that means providing the technology for them to make that happen easily. You can have people give lectures, like have courses, have specialty courses. I think one of the first poster sessions I ever gave was at College of the Bahamas on work I did in Greg's lab. So encouraging, providing the funding, right? We talk about like developing policy, but if you put the money there, right? If you create a program that either gives students and faculty the opportunity to work in labs with other Bahamian scientists or with other scientists in general around the world, people will come and people will, apply for that money, or they will sponsor a student or sponsor a faculty member, right? And I think that, I don't want to say that more than policy, but that is an important part of it, funding science, technology, engineering, and math. Like you put the money there, people will come and people will stay, right? So, and and you ask why people don't come back, like there have to be facilities for people to come back to, right? So I can't do the research that I do here in the Bahamas. I would seriously consider it if that was a possibility. And so I think we sort of need to start to work towards these long-term goals of making that happen, but collaboration and collaborating with scientists who are already abroad, I think is a good and easy first step to making that happen, and building that capacity back home where, the academics and students back home can now foster their own research projects or carry on the projects that they start here. So I think that's sort of like a really easy, low bar that can, it's an easy lift, I think, but backing it up really strongly with the funding to take it to the next level.
Am I getting,
Ambassador.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Moss. Am I getting the sense that we are underachieving as a country?
In the STEM, we could do so much more. But I think like funding for the sciences, for STEM, that's a chronic issue, right? Even in the US. And I think Greg and Dr. Short can speak to that. Like funding, they are chronically underfunded because people sort of don't see the value in some of, so some of the things we work on can seem esoteric or not important, right? The immediate impact is not readily obvious. But I think, so let's look at the pandemic, right? From the time COVID-19 was discovered to the time we had a first vaccine, an efficacious vaccine, was a year and some, right? That was because a lot of work, we're talking at least a decade of work, had been done prior to that. And that was because people decades before saw the need to be prepared, right? To have platforms that we could easily manipulate for pathogen X, right? To be ready for any new disease that came on board. So you sort of have to have that foresight and be willing to fund something, regardless of whether or not you think it's going to be fruitful or it's going to make a lot of money, right? You have to put that investment there. You'll get something out of it. And I think we can also speak and I think Rachel as well, like a lot of discovery and innovation comes out of people just like tooling about in the lab, right?
Exactly. And I was going to pull that thread. Just having an infrastructure so that discovery can be done is a huge first step, and it always sparks curiosity. I found that there was a time early in my career where I had to go through this learning curve of understanding certain software that many people that I was working with had been playing around with for years. And, I learned it a little bit later on, but now that I have that in my toolbox, it's so much easier to get my development environment set up to solve the next problem. But I think it does start with that infrastructure, and that doesn't necessarily mean physical buildings. It just means setting up an environment on a laptop. As mentioned before, so much can be done on a laptop. This pandemic has proven that so much support and education can happen virtually. So as great as getting everyone together in a room is, and as beneficial as that can be, that doesn't always have to be the end all be all. There's a lot that can be done virtually, and a lot of curiosity that can be sparked, especially in young people that tend to kind of know how that all works more than I do. So I think there's a big benefit for putting investments in setting up infrastructure that STEM sort of develops on.
Mr. Moss, I think you wanted to get in here.
Yes, Ambassador. So to go back to your original question about have we been engaged to be able to provide that consultancy assistance, and I've had the opposite, experience where I've had multiple dialogues with the right agencies involved in recovery in the Bahamas, and they're definitely open for dialogue and open to trying to engage. I think it comes back to the level of resources available to be able to engage at the capacity that will be effective, right? So I think the entire panel can say that if we have resources, it might have to be, internal resources, but if we leverage our partnerships throughout the world, we have multiple that want to do business in the Bahamas. How do we make them part of the overall solution? So start saying, hey, you want to build a resort, you want to do different things in the Bahamas. These are things that are going to help us maintain our resiliency, maintain economic stability. So you need to be able to invest in this, right? And that allows us to be able to tap into the brain trust globally based on resources for them to be engaged, right? So for example, disaster recovery, which is a $1 trillion industry, it's not cheap, to be able to plan for mitigation, plan for resiliency, and implement the capital projects that are needed to be effective is going to require resources. So we need to figure out how do we leverage our partners from a private aspect, because we don't have the endless resources to print money to do that. So we need to figure out how do we utilize our private partnerships. And I think this administration is very interested in PPPs or public-private partnerships, but it goes beyond its bricks and mortar. It goes towards the actual effective implementation of resiliency and recovery in our country and building that economic stability that we need. So I think we've got to create solutions and programs where companies can invest that they want to come to the Bahamas to do business, and we utilize those resources to be able to bring in the people we need for those high-level consultancy engagements.
There is a complaint among university-trained people like yourselves that, in some ways, we are an anti-intellectual society in the Bahamas. And I don't know whether or not you would agree with that, but let's discuss it. Are we developing the intellectual bandwidth in the Bahamas to deal with these crises that we are talking about? And I'm sure you all know about the system of education that we have in our country. I don't know who to begin with, perhaps Dr. Storr.
In regards to that, I've had a somewhat positive experience on the academic side. In fact, I did a seminar for the University of Bahamas just in the spring semester, and that's something that the university has ongoing that I've known about for at least about a year. I've watched several of the seminars from professors from other universities in the over here. In terms of to the question that you asked, that one is a bit difficult again for me to really say.
Right.
However, I can say
you're not in touch as you should be.
No, it's not a matter of not being in touch as I should be, but the thing is that to answer a question like that, yes or no, opens up much more, I think, than is quite wanted in that regard. But in terms of my interaction with some of the professionals at home, I've found that outside of the government, that from the corporate side, there tends to be more openness towards my expertise and my assistance and those I have brought. I have, as far as like interacting in terms of like, so one very quick example, before the pandemic hit, one of the issues I met with certain individuals about was dealing with the issue of science and STEM teachers for the Family Islands. So there was always a shortage. And one of the things that was suggested was actually that we could get professionals such as myself and others here, or who would be able to say maybe offer some of the assistance or courses whereby the students, they all come on at one time, then use maybe UB students as a means of tutoring and so forth. And so after a year, then of course the pandemic hit. As far as accessing, as you said, the bandwidth of intellectualism, I think that wherever assistance can be given, individuals seeing that it can be of assistance, that they seem to attract it. In my small circle at home, with individuals who are professionals, non-professionals, that knowing my background and my expertise, that I am approached. Folks seem to be open to what I have to say, whether on social media and such. I think in our case, it's more or less just from the organized perspective, whereby maybe it's a matter of if Dr. Carey is known, then he is entreated, right? If Dr. Sears is known, he's approached. But then if someone is unknown, then by and large, then virtually forgotten. And then if we don't, then on last thing for us, I think we have to also take the steps, because sometimes, maybe as academics, it seems better for individuals to call on us. And then we say, oh, here's what we have.
Yeah.
And perhaps maybe there's an earnest on our part whereby we have to take more deliberate steps and say, here we are, this is who I am. What can we do to help to improve and build our country?
Michelle Wallace-Rencher, I've heard some professional Bahamians say, those who live outside the Bahamas, and even some within the Bahamas, the university trained professionals like yourselves, who would say that, well, the Bahamas is too small for me to practice my craft, or for me to grow as I should grow intellectually. Please give me 2 minutes each of you to that particular question. Let's begin with Dr. Rencher.
Well, absolutely. I have heard the statement. I think it probably even reflects on certain seasons of my life also. But I think what was important to me was I wanted to go ahead and go abroad because I wanted to experience certain things academically and professionally. The opportunity to return, I still believe that there needs to be more space. We all have been to church in the Bahamas. So whether it's Anglican, Baptist, Methodist, Church of God of Prophecy, we've all been to a church in the Bahamas. And we all know what it means when someone tells you, I run in late, save some space for me in the pew. By the time you get to that pew, the usher brings you there, and either ladies, you slip your legs to the left or you slide in the pew. I believe what needs to happen in the Bahamas to make certain that we get away from a us and them kind of conversation when it comes to developing and becoming a more emerging nation is that we make space. There are many of us, we all on this call and on previous calls, I'm certain, and probably even your next call, we all have the capacity to do something. I believe the time has come for us not to necessarily talk about what is wrong or what has not gone well. But as the Bahamas approaches her 50th anniversary, I believe the time is right. I mean, again, it's difficult for us to go ahead and talk about how we're doing compared to Barbados or how we're doing compared to the United States. We are very close to the US, absolutely. But we're close in terms of geographics. We're close in terms of some instances. But when it comes to Bahamian culture, when it comes to the way that we represent ourselves in business, the way that we speak, the way that we dress, the way that we eat, we are so unique in this space that I believe the time has come for us not to necessarily separate ourselves from people, but to really stand out and say, listen, the rest of the Caribbean region is struggling in the brain drain. We are all experiencing the same kind of climate change. We're all experiencing the pandemic. We're all struggling with economic instability. And we're all talking about equity challenges when it comes to every bit of technology. But I believe the time is right for us to go ahead and say, Bahamians on the soil, make some space. Allow Bahamians who live globally, who live within the wider diaspora, to share some ideas. And just for one quick thing, we all have been a part of been a part of remittance, whether it means Cash App, MoneyGram, the long lines at RBC or Scotiabank or Western Union. That's something that Bahamians all know about financial remittance. I want to offer the concept of social remittance. That's the concept of sharing ideas, which is an even exchange of ideas. I may not be the best person at making peas and rice, but I may know how to give you a project plan that's going to make your head spin. I may have some spreadsheets that's going to say, what? Because that's what I do all day long. Okay. I have had a definite overall plan of strategy that works well in Japan, that works well in the UK. And guess what? I don't speak Japanese. So it's extremely important to talk to persons who work globally, because even though I work in the public sector today, I'm proud to say the public sector of the Bahamas, I believe, has the answer to many of the Bahamas' problems. We look at the private sector as being the bread and butter, but my study was able to prove the public sector is where it's at. They were the only ones who did not get furloughed. Okay. They were the ones that kept the country going. And so I believe it's time to make space in the public sector. It's time to make space in the private sector. But as long as you make space for our ideas and our perspectives to come across the ocean, we can make amazing things happen between now and the end of next year.
Dr. Carey, Eleuthera might be too small for you, but is the Bahamas too small for you?
You know, you're trying to start something. And my colleague said it perfectly. She articulated it perfectly. I don't think that Bahamas too small. I was starving to get in Eleuthera, to work from Eleuthera during the worst of the pandemic. In fact, my dean said, go work from your Eleuthera, from your parents' home area. And I couldn't, because when I went, the technology wouldn't support the Zoom and all the stuff that I had to do. So maybe point one for us is to get the technology and the communication infrastructure where we need it to be. And then the social exchange or interchange that Dr. Rencha was talking about, that can be better facilitated. And Eleuthera is, that's, my wife and I actually just started a foundation. We just, our son is a lawyer. He set up a foundation for us. And one of the focuses of that foundation, Impact Global, is going to be taking intellectual and academic resources into Eleuthera, some financials, but you can't just think financial. People think, okay, how can you help me out financially? We want to impart and set up conduits for information and knowledge to flow, so that there's more like me. I want to see 50 like me. I want to see 100 like me. I want to see Eleuthera restored to its former glory, where Eleuthera was the breadbasket of the Bahamas. You know that. Hatchet Bay Farms, South Eleuthera Farms. When you open a can of tomato paste, where did that come from? Bahamas Best. It came from up in South Eleuthera, pineapples and the rest of it. We are underutilized there. Why can't we have some food security and some STEM, some agriculture, some technology, some mechanization, using maybe solar heat to make cool greenhouses or whatever else? I mean, they're doing some of that in South Eleuthera now with the CTI, with the One Eleuthera Foundation. Some of it needs to be larger scale. We talk about, my parents are fixed income, they're older, they talk about the prices. Every single thing is imported. We're importing limes and tomatoes. For goodness sake, it's a burden on our society there. What's stopping us from having new ideas and new approaches to help with food security and using technology better to make the lives of people there better? Eleuthera, Bahamas, not too small for me. Sometimes I feel like sometimes I wonder if I'm welcome, because I'm not welcomed into the conversation. So I like the church pew analogy that was just heard. It's here I am. Can I do something? Can I? And it's like, no.
Can you get in the pew?
I think people just spread out a little bit wider just to make sure you don't get a seat. This brings me back to the one last point I'll make, is that when we're growing up in the Out Islands, we felt this. And even when I ran for president of College of the Bahamas years ago, It's us and them. This us and them in the Bahamas. It's us and them in America. There's us and them in the Bahamas. Nassau, the Out Islands. All Out Islands. We're family islands. We're family of islands. Where are you coming from? What school are you coming from? Why should you have a seat at the table? These kinds of questions. This falls. These kinds of wars and tribal wars and concept wars and who comes from where. This nonsense has to stop. I want to see the Bahamas unified in efforts in dealing with STEM-based issues, technology-based issues. It is one Bahamas. And I think once upon a time, Bahamian intellectuals or academics did set themselves apart from the other people, and that made people resentful. Because when some of the family, for example, would have come from Nassau and they made us feel different because Nassau was a certain way, the Islands were a certain way, there's a human reaction to that. I think we need to get beyond that. So for those of us who've been guilty of making people feel like, okay, I've studied something, I know more than you, or whatever, we need to ask for forgiveness for that and get over that and get beyond that. We're in this all together. There are people that the fishermen, the farmers, and the old people who know the land well, me Luther, that they teach me the building. The hurricanes haven't pushed down those old buildings on the front street of Topham Bay, almost in the water. The old Anglican church is still there. Better structure, support, engineering than a lot of steel-infused buildings. Talk to the old people. How do they do that? What was the difference in materials? What makes those old wooden houses on Harbor Island and on parts of Topham Bay right on the waterfront flex in a hurricane and not break down? And yet the stone and steel and the rest of them, they all go down. There are things to learn from everyone. Everyone has a seat at the table. I think we need to open it up so that someone doesn't feel threatened by someone who's been outside and been educated, and someone doesn't feel like they are looking down on someone who's been there and been holding things down, as esteemed Dr. Storr said a little bit earlier. We need to get beyond the tribalism that permeates the politics, the culture, the inter-island exchanges. I want to see Eleuthera there for my great-grandchildren. And that's not going to happen if I set myself apart from Eleuthera all the time. I wish I can go there tomorrow and work, to be honest. But you have to help to make that happen for me, Your Excellency.
Absolutely, that is what we are about right now. Let's go to Shanda.